Doods. Welcome back to another relaxing video with Doodles. And we're also going to do a bedtime story today. We're just going to make it up on the way. We're not rehearsing it. We didn't write a script. We're just going to make up a story and we're going to illustrate it to try and bring it some life. And this is all to help you get some sleep, help you clear your mind, give you something to focus on here on the page instead of those thoughts in your brain that might be causing you some stress or some anxiety. So yeah, stick around and watch the video and hopefully it helps you achieve those things. So let's get into the story. Once upon a time, there was a world where people would carry around a pot of flour, or more commonly known as a potted flower, just like this. Everyone in the world had their own, just like that. When people are born in this world, they're given just a gardening pot. All it does is a bunch of dirt. There's no flower yet. Not even a sprout. And the little babies are never too far from these potted plants. There we go, just like that. And as they grow, they're able to carry these everywhere with them. So when they become toddlers, let's see if we can draw a nice little toddler here. When they become a toddler, they can carry around their flower pot. Still no sprout, still no flower. But they carry it around because it's just kind of what everyone does. When they grow older, maybe late teens or so, the flower pot changes. Just like the boys are changing and just like the girls are changing when they get older, so does the flower pot. However, when you meet someone in your everyday life, someone you probably least expected, you feel some sort of connection with them. And maybe as you meet this new person in your life, maybe something happens with the flower pot. Maybe a little bud creeps out of the soil, just like this. And it only happens when you meet someone you're destined to meet. These two were just sharing a ride on the bus. No other seats, so they had to sit next to each other. And then suddenly, their flower pots began to grow. Everyone was growing happy. Everyone was meeting their special friend, and their flowers were growing very, very tall. And it allowed people to know that they found that special someone whenever their flower pots decided to grow. It kind of took the mystery out of everything. It took the mystery out of, do they like me? Are we meant to be together? But the flowers never lied, and they only grew when you met the right person. And that was the reason for everyone carrying their flower pot. Women, men, all over the planet were finding their happiness because their flower pots never lied. And it was always a special time when two people would find their loved ones in the world. And the flowers, they grew so abundantly. However, one person, sitting alone in a bench in the park, sat with an empty pot of soil. He didn't look very happy. And he didn't like the flowers that he would see all around him, because it would remind him just how lonely he was, with no special person in his life, and only a pot full of soil with no growth whatsoever, even though he'd been to many places, met plenty of people. He never could find a special somebody, and his pot remained barren. So this made him angry, and he was jaded, and he did not like the way people looked when they were happy, because he wanted only to be happy, but he just couldn't be, and he thought everything was unfair. One day, this lonely man was standing in his apartment, feeling very sorry for himself. He was getting tired of being alone, and he thought he would never find anybody. So he decided to throw his flower pot out the window. There it goes, just like that. He says, "This isn't fair. If I'm supposed to find someone, how come they haven't been found?" And there it goes, right out the open window. He had given up on ever finding someone special, and had fallen into a deep, deep sadness. However, the man did not know that there was someone else out in the world, someone else that also hasn't found someone special, and they too also had a very empty flower pot, and she was getting very lonely too. She would walk home every day by herself, and she would see all the people around her happy with their special people, their flower pots full of life, and she would be all alone. She didn't think it was very fair either. She's got her empty flower pot right here. Just like that. And she's on the way home, feeling very sorry for herself, thinking that everything is unfair. She had decided that she had had enough, that she was going to get rid of her flower pot. She was tired of being alone, and she was tired of seeing all the happy people, and she was tired of being reminded that she was by herself and maybe will be for her whole life. And maybe it made her cry, but she had convinced herself that she would get rid of the flower pot. So she was going to go throw it into the dumpster. She didn't want anyone to see this. So she picked an alleyway so she could find a dumpster, and she would get rid of her flower pot. Because how unfair is it that she could find nobody, but everyone else around her was finding very special people, and their flower pots were growing very, very tall with life. So here's the sidewalk behind her, some buildings and stuff. She found a dark alleyway to get rid of her flower pot. She knew that you're not supposed to do this. In fact, she's never heard of anyone getting rid of their flower pots. But she's had enough. So she walked on without a single care to get rid of it. And then when she approached the dumpster, let's see if we can draw a dumpster. They've got those. There we go, just like that. They're usually on wheels too. Then as she approached the dumpster, she began to cry, but she was very angry still. And she was kind of hesitant, and she just maybe took a couple extra seconds, and then suddenly a flower pot was falling out of the sky. And it got closer, and it hit her in the head. The woman cried out in pain. She thought her life could not be any more unfair. The flower pot in her arms was empty, and then here was another flower pot which did not shatter, that hit her in the head, and she was just like very surprised. And she had a big knot on her head. Here's her second flower pot that did not break. She cried, and decided to just go home, and without throwing the flower pots away. And now she thought it was just a cruel trick of fate, that instead of having one flower pot that was empty with no flower, that fate would bring her two, just to kind of remind her that she was alone. So she went to sleep, decided to just let the whole thing go, and she cried herself to sleep. She was very sad. How could the world be so cruel to her? And here she is in her bed, tucked in under her blankets, her big pillow here. But she was sad. Nothing brought her joy, and the world wanted to remind her she was alone, doubly alone. She decided to put her flower pots next to her original one, and the one she found in the alley, and just cried herself to sleep. Then, in the morning, when the sunlight came through, and it was time for her to wake up, she opened her eyes, not wanting to get out of bed, and she turned her head to see that the flower pots had grown a sprout. She couldn't believe it. She rushed and grabbed her glasses to make sure she was seeing what she was seeing. She couldn't believe it. How could this be? How could this be? She was getting ready to throw her flower pot away, and then one had crashed into her head, and remarkably, not cracked or shattered. And now the two of them, sitting next to each other, had grown their buds. She could not believe this. What did this mean? Who was this pot originally belonging to? How would she ever find out? She didn't know. And again, the sadness came. Because how would she ever find the one person that is also losing a pot when there were so many people around her? So again, she became sad and maybe cried again. One day, she was walking through the park, just kind of minding her own business, still in her own little melancholy, still feeling sad, even though a miracle had occurred, and she was holding now 2 sprouts, and she was just walking in the park, still unsure of what to do, when suddenly something caught her eye. Over to her left, she saw someone sitting on the park bench. This is her face changing into a more surprised face, and an exclamation mark to show her surprise. What she had seen was someone sitting there alone on the park bench with no flower pot. There he was, our man from earlier in the story, sitting here, all by himself, and he had no flower pot. His lap was empty, and she couldn't believe her eyes. These flower pots really were destiny. How could she have found this man so quickly? She didn't know how to approach him, because honestly, he really didn't look that approachable. He looked very, very unhappy, and he was very much gloomy. We're just going to add some of these lines to make it very gloomy. The man was deep in thought, thinking again about how he threw his flower pot outside of the window, and he thought it would make him a little happier. But he found that he was still very sad. He wasn't really concentrating on anything around him, just wondering how life could be so unfair. And then suddenly, a woman decided to sit next to him. She was very nervous, he could tell, but he didn't really care about much anyway. He didn't say hello, didn't even really look at her. So the two of them just kind of sat next to each other on this bench. And suddenly, she handed him a flower pot. He was a little surprised and didn't know what was going on. But then he looked down and saw there was a sprout. And then she had a sprouted pot as well. He says, "Where did you get this pot?" And she says, "Oh, well, I was walking in the alley, and suddenly it hit me on the head. I was getting ready to throw my flower pot away because I hadn't found anyone special, and it was just soil for many years and many, many, many years." And the man began to cry. He said, "This is my flower pot. How did you know it was mine?" And she says, "Well, you're sitting here without a flower pot, and I just assumed it was yours." And he couldn't believe it. She had been able to find him, and he was finally seeing a sprout in his flower pot. She began to cry too, because they had found each other when they were just about to give up. They spent many, many happy days together after that, neither of them feeling so lonely, each of them finding so much happiness in the other, and the man smiling so much more, and the woman couldn't believe how quickly her life changed. The two of them together, happy as can be, in their two flower pots, growing very well. Big flowers growing from each of their pots, just like this. happily ever after. So there we go, my dudes. This was the story of the growing flower pots. A world where people had flower pots that grow once they found their special person. And of two people that almost gave up on love, but destiny brought them together anyway. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button or leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of the story. And if you want to see more of this type of content, feel free to hit the subscribe button so we can go through some more stories together, made up at the drop of a dime. No script, no rehearsal, just completely made up. Right at, on the fly. And that's a lot of fun to do. I'm gonna have to start doing more of these videos because they're very fun. What a nice story that was. And I hope you enjoyed it too. And maybe you're getting nice and sleepy. And you can get some nice needed sleep. Goodbye, my dudes. And I'll catch you in the next video.